Okay.
That's okay with everyone?
Yeah.
You can.
Hi, Valdine. The forum still going on?
Yes, it is.
All right, okay.
Hello. Good afternoon and welcome. Miss Maula Bash, you can smile.
Hello. How are you, Mary?
I am good. I am good. Marlon,
Smiling eludes me sometimes.
Hey, I'll see you later.
nice. Hi, Marlon. How you doing?
Hey, I'm okay. I'm okay.
All right, good. All right, well, I'm going to jump off because people are going to start to come in. So just welcome and thank you so much for your time and allowing us to intrude on your lunch hour. We look forward to the engagement.
No worries.
Take care.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you.
All right. Arlene, you're still here with us, right?
Yes, I am.
Okay, great. So we'll be starting in 2 minutes.
Oh, Valdine, I don't know you and I didn't acknowledge you. My apologies. Hi, Mary Bastian. Welcome.
Hi. Hi, thank you.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon and welcome to the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services National Family Services conversation titled Beyond Bystanding, Turning Silence into Solidarity. This is being held in commemoration of the 16 days of activism to end gender-based violence, which ends today, December 10th, and in honor of World Human Rights Day, which is also commemorated today. These two critical observances remind us of the universal truth that human dignity is non-negotiable, and silence in the face of injustice is not an option. Gender-based violence continues to affect countless lives, eroding the fundamental rights to safety, freedom, and equality. In Trinidad and Tobago, alarming reports over the last couple of months have highlighted a troubling trend where bystanders either fail to intervene or were unable to respond in critical moments. These incidents underscore the urgent need for greater awareness, education, and empowerment in our communities. When people fail to act, the cycle of violence continues unchecked, and lives are left in jeopardy. That is why today's discussion is not just timely, but necessary. As we reflect on the power of activism, we also acknowledge the critical role each of us plays in shifting the culture of bystanding into one of solidarity and action. So, what is bystanding? The Oxford Dictionary defines a bystander as someone who is present but not taking part in an event or intervening. This is most times related to situations of violence or crime. Today, we are fortunate to have three remarkable panelists with us, each of whom brings unique insights and expertise to this vital conversation. Their voices will help us explore how we can break the cycle of silence and transform our communities into safer, more supportive spaces for everyone. As we begin, I encourage you to engage deeply, reflect openly, and think about how the lessons we discuss can inspire meaningful action in your own life and community. So, thank you everyone for being with us. Let me welcome our panelists this afternoon, Ms. Sabrina Maula Bash, General Manager of the Coalition Against Domestic Violence. Welcome. Thank you for being with us. Ms. Valdine Shares, very uniquely known as survivor, advocate, mentor, which means Sam. Thank you, Valdine, for joining us this afternoon. And Mr. Marlon Bascom, Country Director, USAID YRIE. Did I get that right, Marlon? Nice. Thank you so much for being with us. So we'll just kick it right off by asking a general question to all panelists. If you can share with us a personal experience where you yourself might have witnessed gender-based violence or harassment, and what made you choose or not choose to intervene in that particular situation? Marlon, you can go first. I see you ready.
Oh, sure. Well, in my case, I harken back with this question to the first time I remember seeing gender-based violence. It was the incident in which my parents were separating, and I was 11 years old, and I saw my father hit my mom. I intervening wasn't even a thought to go against my father at that age, but what I took from it was that immediately after that, my mom would have spoken to me and indicated, okay, she's leaving the house, and she would come back for my brothers and I. And so it was then that began to get a sense of the strength that survivors of violence have, and sometimes what it takes to make a life-changing decision. Yeah. So
Right.
that's my example.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Marlon. And you can see how that very first experience that you had showed strength even in yourself in understanding what that parent was going through. Sabrina?
Thank you. Thank you, Michelle. And so I would want to, like Marlon, share a personal experience. And of course, I too grew up in a situation of violence, in an environment of violence, where I witnessed my dad beating up on my mom all the time and me intervening all the time. And as early as 6 years old, I realized I began taking action because my dad liked to talk. He liked to talk about the moon and the stars and about astronomy and et cetera, et cetera. And so the minute I knew he came home intoxicated, I will try to deflect and engage him so he will not interface with my mom. So I will sit with him and I will talk and I will engage him probably until he fell asleep. So if he falls asleep, then my mother was safe. So I did that. It didn't work all of the time because I do not know, somehow or the other he woke up, he found some way to wake up. But of course, being exposed to that personal situation of violence and not feeling very happy about it, receiving blows and protecting my mother on many occasions. And then the second one was not a personal experience, and I do not encourage people to do this, but I'm so passionate about this situation that sometimes I put myself in danger, and it happened with a neighbor of mine when the neighbor's son was found in a way on his girlfriend. And I, without a second thought, when I was witnessing I ran down my steps and ran into the neighbor's yard and, sought to get, I didn't see any weapon, but he was found in a way on her. And I intervened and put myself, in the middle of both of them. And then I took the girl away, brought her to my house, called the police. And so those are instances, one personal and one otherwise. And my intervening, that's just one of many examples that I've had in intervening throughout my entire life. Yeah. But I want to reiterate, and we'll talk about that, how we intervene as upstanders and how we do that safely.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Sabrina. And definitely we could see with both instances, different opportunities to intervene and what that would have looked like for you at different stages in your life. Thank you so much. And what about you, Valdine?
Hi, hi, you all hearing me clearly?
Yes.
Okay, so on a person, well, the thing about it is, because I'm a survivor, even on a professional intervention, it still seems personal, because this would be someone who I can identify with because I lived practically the same situation. So on a personal intervention, I would have seen my mom, and the only man I'd ever called daddy, my stepfather at the age probably about from 7 to 11, who had been a perfect father figure. He decided he wanted to end the relationship, and that was the only time I ever remember him being violent or abusive to her. it started with a conversation because he wanted her gone, and that meant wanting her gone. Out of the 3 daughters, myself and my elder sister were not his children, only my youngest sister. So it meant we had to leave. And they had an altercation. They had a physical altercation. That was my first exposure to seeing something happening. And I remember going between them. And that was the last day I called him daddy. On a professional intervention, it has been several, because now I have worked with the gender-based violence head in terms of persons refer victims to my number sometimes. And then I, like Sabrina, I often think about being able to help them physically, like I'm ready. But then I think about, because my survivor mode kicks in, I think I have to do this strategically, because you can put yourself in danger.
Right.
The thing about it is, like Sabrina said, all of the victims that I've helped professionally has always been mostly over the phone, referrals for psychosocial help, advising them to call 800-SAVE, actually contacting the police for them, contacting shelters for them, getting them out. But if I were to actually see, like Sabrina saw, like the neighbors, I think it would be very hard for me to just make a phone call. It would be very hard for me to just turn a blind eye, because that is the same help I would have wanted when I was in my situation.
Understood.
So,
And it kind of brings us into the next question, Valdine, which I'll pose to you. And you probably mentioned some of it, so we could go a little deeper into what are some of the examples of ways that people can safely intervene, in situations of violence, whether it's public spaces, whether it's work or school. What are ways that they can ensure that they themselves are safe while assisting someone?
okay, so first of all, I would say, when I talk to victims, like presently I'm a part-time mentor at a DV shelter in South. And aside from that, persons contact me through a WhatsApp safety group I have. And one of the first things I tell them is, I cannot put on an orange cape and come to your rescue. What I can do, my first advice is to always contact the first responders, the TTPS, 800-SAVE. And if you are someone looking on in a situation, you can quietly, anonymously make a phone call on someone's behalf. You can make a report of disturbance of the peace, or just call the number and say, I'm hearing something happening by my neighbors, and maybe there's something going on. And if you do know that there is a history of violence going on there, but then again, you see, some of what I may share may touch on the other part of what we are meant to discuss, because we have no legislation in place to mandate bystander and community reporting.
Right.
And to me, that is one of the main things, because if the community feels that there might be a fine to pay, um, um, a prison term to make, if they think that there's a legal responsibility on them to report cases, they won't just take out their phone and prefer to do a video that goes viral for likes and comments.
Understood.
They'll think now the responsibility is on me legally, that I can be charged and be held accountable if I just choose to say nothing. So that is
Right.
one of it. As well as, if there are children involved, I would consider, if it's me, I would consider making a report to the relevant authorities, because now the amended DV Act states that you can make an intervention on behalf of a child to be taken out of a situation of domestic violence if there is a pattern of exposure. So I think we now have to rally as a community around victims and survivors in order to get them out safely, strategically, and without endangering ourselves.
Yes. Okay, understood. Thank you so much, Valdine. So we spoke about, Valdine mentioned legislation, And do you think, in addition to what you shared, some sort of training, workshops for bystanders could play a role in equipping the community with responding to situations of violence within their community safely? Do you think that's something that can strengthen their role? Sorry.
Can I say that maybe we should even look at the workplace? How much of corporate TT has workplace policies when it comes to DV in terms of becoming actively involved? If let's say a victim comes in and there's a visible sign that they're abused or the violence spills over to on the job, because I had an incident on my job and it was just whispered about. It was that no one, again, it goes back to community and how much anyone wants to actually step in for victims on a victim's behalf. So
Thank you.
on that level, yes, I think we need such a robust awareness campaign so that a lot of victims still don't know where to get help, how to get help, who to get help from. And that's the one thing that we need to have spot ads. We need to utilize social media and sensitize the public on their responsibility as just being a brother's keeper until legislation comes into power.
Great. Thank you so much, Valdine. And we will sort of stream across to you, Marlon, when we look at the conversation around culture and the narratives that make men feel empowered to step up in these situations, even when there is this fear of backlash. How do you think that do you think that men are sometimes misunderstood when they try to stand up in these situations?
Definitely, because you see, number one, we have so many different perceptions about masculinity or what manhood is. And unfortunately, a lot of those perceptions are negative. So I can speak to it personally, and you begin to speak uh, against violence in general and against violence against women specifically. And I've been called everything under the sun, a sellout, brainwashed by the feminists, anything, anything you educated, UN woman, plant, all these sorts of things occur, right? And then and that's in speaking in those spaces. But then also when you try to look at things that may not even fall within the traditional gender roles, like for example, as a father wanting to be a caregiver, the same applies. So men are definitely not empowered to speak out or to step out without fear of backlash. We are definitely pushed back into that man box, so to speak, and
Understand.
we are not empowered to speak out. And then the other side of the coin is there's a subsection of men who take these conversations as personal attacks, especially when you don't understand the sometimes the level of fear that our sisters or ladies are walking around with. There's a tendency by some men, okay, because I've never engaged in a personal act of violence myself against a woman, to 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 have fear of me causes me to get angry in a different way. So what we have to do, at least, and this is my personal belief, we've been talking within these 16 days, and also even in trying to frame some of the conversations prior around International Men's Day, is how to even talk to men. So I think you would want to start to begin broadly by highlighting, positive aspects of masculinity and show that gender equality strengthens family cohesion, it strengthens children well-being, it adds to economic stability. You want to then, begin to create those environments where men could trash out their issues, good or bad, however, whatever topics come up, without them feeling attacked as well. And you want to push that level of environment so that a man is now comfortable without fear of somebody calling him toxic, without fear of somebody indicating that he himself is a threat when he may not be. But you want to also ensure that those men who may not be aware are aware of the levels of fear in which some of our ladies exists. What it means, it's different for me when I leave my house and I walk in the street, even at night, as it may be for the ladies on the panel. And you want to be able to communicate that in such a way that it's not the genders are not split into opposing factions, but can see commonality. I hope I'm making sense. I feel like I'm rambling.
Very much. Very much so. I get you. And if I were to summarize, I would say ensuring that men have
Yes.
safe spaces for men. And just a follow-up to that, do you have any examples where this positive masculinity is being practiced to support gender equality and the safety of women? Are we seeing it, or is it more of the fear that we're seeing for men to
It's
stand up?
it's there, but you're not seeing it. You're not seeing the positive aspects of it in a way that is general. So on a global scale, the Men Engage Alliance does a lot of work. Carryman, which it's a regional NGO that I'm a part of, is part of that global alliance. And in many different spaces, they do a lot of work, including publishing the State of the World Fathers Report, which is done every 2 years. In the local space, there are groups doing good work. There's the Men Can group. Um, there's different things being done that highlights men in a more positive way, and in very small locations, whether it's in churches or religious circles, in very small locations, almost in the corners. there there are those spaces where men are beginning to speak. But however, what makes it to the public again is those negative connotations. And we must, don't get me wrong, we must always call out and speak up against any negative aspect of toxic culture, of violence, of anything like that. But
Yeah.
I think that those positive aspects can be highlighted more, and also to show how uh, men can speak in support of our sisters and against violence against women in particular, and violence in general. Yeah,
Yes, thank you, Marlon. So we're
sure.
definitely hearing that in Trinidad and Tobago, within our society, there are the voices of men, and we want those voices amplified to create that domino effect throughout society, so that other persons would recognize that men are speaking, and men are speaking out and up against violence against women. So thank you
Yes,
so much for sharing those very valuable points with us, Marlon.
sure.
Um, I'm seeing Valdine's hands raised. You wanted to add, Valdine, go ahead.
Can I just add something to what Marlon just said? Two things actually. If we think that if the call right now is for more support for women and girls, then I think in all fairness and in terms of gender equality, then the call supposed to also be the same spirit, the same enthusiasm for men. Because I look at when we celebrate Women's Day, International Day, and we get all this across the social media platforms. And then when it's International Men's Day, we get a fraction of it. So that's on one aspect. Another thing is in terms of a perpetrator. I don't know. I know there were frameworks, and I know the CADV has called for a comprehensive rehabilitative batterers intervention program where we don't focus. Society is no longer the person that will say, lock them up and throw the key. You're beating your wife, that is it for you, without considering the perpetrator's childhood experiences, without considering that hurt people, without considering this is not to justify the abuse, but it's to say there's a root to every problem or issue. And also, when a person is a male victim, which is underreported even more than women, which there's a greater stigma because you as a man can't go in the police station and say, my wife beating me. So where is the support in terms of a male victim? If we're looking at the female victim, because everybody, even with the call for better protection and more legislative to protect women and girls, against domestic violence, there is still that need to include men, that there are cases of them. And I had my first encounter on a program, a UN program, and 2 of my clients were males. And one of them was discouraged in trying to get a protection order. And what I discovered also is that the mindset of the male victim is almost the same as a female. When it comes to, oh God, can I do, why would I take a protection order against your mother because I'm studying? The children would be thinking how they're looking at daddy, how I'm mashing up the family. It's the same mindset as a victim's mindset. There's no gender when it comes to being a victim.
Understood. So it's
Definitely and
definitely,
wholeheartedly agreed. Sorry. Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah.
No, I was just going to reinforce that, this, if we are to strive for gender equality, then we should recognize that these nuances exist as it relates to how both men and women victims are treated at different levels of the system. So thank you so much for sharing that. Definitely some deep thought has to go into how we respond to these cases and how we encourage men and boys to report, because we know that that is one of the issues that sort of prohibits us from identifying accurately that these cases exist. So thank you so much, Baldine, for that. And now we would go across to Sabrina as we talk about community and community building. I want to ask you, how can community build networks of support for both survivors of violence and those who want to help but may be unsure how they can help?
Yeah, that's a very important question, and thank you for that question, Michelle. But I just wanted to, if you'd allow me, just to to respond and to the conversation started by Marlon, and in which we had input from Valdine, and to say two things. When we talk about gender, there is the misperception that gender is about women's issues. The very definition of gender has to do with men and women, how we understand what the roles of men and women are. So it does not say it's a woman's issue, or it only talks about understanding women. But what we do know is that the majority of those who experience and report gender-based violence are women. And so we know that over 80% of those who present, and so women are disproportionately represented, or they have the higher numbers of persons reporting. And we know that goes back to notions of men and masculinity, and how men see themselves and see their roles, and how women see themselves and their roles, and which ends up in unequal power relationships where men are privileged. Men are seen as playing certain superior roles in these relationships where it's an abusive relationship, because we know that it's about abuse and intimate partner violence, and gender-based violence is about power and control. And that's very much related to the whole question of gender and the different kinds of roles that we play. And I just wanted to address the second thing, the question of men's involvement in changing the reality. And I just want to reinforce that the gains that have been made over the years, especially as it relates to equality and even the legislation and all sorts of policies, were made predominantly by women advocating for the rights, and for the rights of women, one, and for focus and a spotlight to be made on how women are disadvantaged, and how their rights were being infringed on. And so recently I did some research, and the numbers are startling. It will take 300 years for women to get to equal rights, or in a situation of equality. Legally, it will take about 100 years. So we're talking centuries that require for women to reach the same equal point as men. So we must never, in so doing, we must be very, very careful, even as women, when we call for establishing that space and that equal space for men. And I'm not saying that we do not need to do it, but what I'm saying is that, and I think Marlon will agree, and that is why the work of Carryman, another men's organization, it's important. So in the same way, I think the women in the women's movement is to pursue, and to advocate and lobby for the rights. I think it's the men have the same responsibility as well, likewise, to carve that space and make the calls for what they, from the men's perspective and through their lens, what they see, and even to amplify their voices in terms of what their needs are, what needs to be done, and to carve that space out. And so I just wanted to make that point, because I often go to many forums and I hear things like men are at risk and we need to create safe space for men, and we need, but while we're doing that, we also need to be mindful that there's a lot of catching up to do still by women, because many of us feel that women reach, and women have, we occupy particular spaces in business and academia, etc., but there's still a gender pay gap. One. Two, do you know men and women in sport do not receive the same pay? Do you know that in the companies, I think it's at about 5%, the managerial position are women. So if we were to look at where women need to be, and in terms of addressing the whole question of inequality, we need to strategically determine how we advance the equality, and who is involved, and where we need to do the work, and who needs to do the work. So I just wanted to make that point. And so I want to just go back. Yeah, I also want to just talk about, how we need to respond as a community response. So earlier we talked about our individual responses, Marlon, Valian, and I, and how we responded on an individual level. And but several things I want to identify maybe about 4 things. And the first thing in developing responses, whether at an individual level and at a community level, is the lens through which we see things. That of course it's that comes from our ideological foundations, how we see men, how we see women, how we see violence against women and girls. And so many of us, including communities, are still of the opinion that what we see is normal. And so we see nothing wrong if we see somebody a woman being beaten, if we see a man being beaten, if we see a child being beaten, because that lens through which we see it tells us that, our grandparents did it, our parents did it, so nothing is wrong with it. So the first thing, is to help us to be able to change the lens. And that goes back to the preventative work that Valdine was talking about, and that's critical, because if we do anything, we do not see a reason to develop a response. Yes, because we see it as, and of course, this has to do also with the shaming of victims. And knowing what abuse means. Recently, yesterday we had a conversation at the level of CAD where we talked to, a panel discussion where we spoke to Tot Lampkin. For many of us who do not know who Tot Lampkin is the mother of Samantha Isaac. Samantha Isaac was murdered in 2017. She was shot in her legs and she was shot in her head. But this case is particularly significant because Samantha Isaac made police reports. The case went to court. After her death, Tot Lampkin, which is her mother, through the intervention of CADV, took legal action and won the case. And this case is significant because Justice Robin Mohammed found that the state, especially the protective service and the judiciary, failed Samantha Isaac, and that is a landmark case. And I'm using this example to say, when we were talking who was herself a survivor of domestic violence for 36 years. And you know what was striking for me, even as she was talking yesterday, and this murder happened in 2017. She said, I did not know I was experiencing abuse. I did not know that there was support available. But this is 2017, this is not 1965. And here we have someone, a woman saying, I did not know that there was support available. I did not know what was abuse. And so in helping us to change the lens, we must understand what abuse is. And very often community members and people see it. They see it, but it's so normalized, they do not recognize it as abuse. And we can only take action and be in a bite an upstander when we understand what it is. So education around what is abuse, what are the different forms of abuse, and of course, recognizing it as a crime. We still do not see it as a crime, as something punishable by law. And so understanding as much as we can about what is abuse is very important. The third thing for communities and developing community responses is around knowing what resources are available. And so like Todd Lampkin, she did not know that there were organizations like Coalition Against Domestic Violence, 800 SAVE, Victim and Witness Support Unit, what they can do and what resources, that communities can make, avail themselves to. And even if they know of a neighbor, a relative, whoever, friend, they can point them to the resources. If I don't know it, I'm not in a position to advise you, even if you come and you tell me. Knowing the signs, what to look for, if you find a neighbor maybe is too quiet and always inside. Now I'm not saying that all neighbors who are quiet and inside are survivors of abuse, but if they're not allowed to talk to neighbors, if they're not allowed to interact, even in the workplace, if someone is too quiet, if someone is too aggressive, it could be that those persons are victims and survivors of the violence. So it's important to know what the signs are. And it's important as well for community to develop maybe informal and formal responses. Persons, now there are a lot of chat groups, in which your persons can in neighborhoods around, but of course it has to be a safe space. See, I want to agree with Valdine as well, developing a safe space. And I would want to developing like a response team within particular communities. There are lawyers, there are social workers, there are psychologists, there are counselors, there are persons working in the government sector, living in communities. We have to be able to harness those skills in the communities. And by communities, it doesn't have to be people living in the same street. It doesn't even have to be people living in the same geographical area. If you know of someone and you can pull a team together and say, listen, let us work on something, let us put this thing in place. And then if we know of anybody, we can refer persons to this team of people. And then this team of people can be, the resource in a locality, in a region that can help us to respond, and that we can put the survivors who we know about in touch with, So I just want to offer some of those, and prevention work is very, very important. Sensitization, reaching the communities, spending time in those communities. Not many people have access to webinars and will go to a community caravan and go out to public things that are being held. I think we have to learn about creative ways, to reach people who need it the most, people, vulnerable communities, communities that are marginalized, so that we get to them, because some of them are the ones who are not aware. And I want to tell you, and it's not only the vulnerable and marginalized, I just want to be able to clear that up. There are a lot of professional women and men who experience abuse, and they do not report, they're not even aware, and they do not know how to seek help, when to seek help, that kind of thing. So there are a number of ways in which we can learn to respond, as communities, and when I say communities, I do not mean simply geographic communities alone. It does not mean maybe Princeton or Mayaro or or Belmont or wherever. Communities of interest. So communities of interest would refer to maybe Rotary clubs, religious interest institutions, seroptimists, women's organizations, psychologist associations. So even at the level of communities of interest, there are many things that organizations such as those can do to address it, but it requires, most importantly, a multi-sectoral approach, an integrated approach, and definitely a survivor-centered approach. Those are some of the terminologies, I'm sorry, that I want to kind of splice in there. I know I've talked for a long time, so let me kind of shut up now and leave it for the others to kind of chime in.
Thank you so much, Sabrina. I think that you've left us with a lot of things to think about. And I think my follow-up question was going to be around how some of these different organizations could really play a role in providing support systems. And I think you mentioned it when you spoke about communities of practice. So when we think about churches, the schools in your community, any other faith-based organizations, CBOs, that type of thing, how everybody using that multi-sectorial approach as well as an integrated and holistic response to bringing awareness to communities and building a camaraderie where everybody understands what is happening within the family, what we're faced with, and how do we respond? Where do we get help? So I want to thank you so much for all of that. Very valuable. And I see Valdine has something to add. Thanks, Valdine. Go ahead.
Can I just continue on what Sabrina just mentioned? So one of the things I wrote down was, again, so much of this thing goes back to the will of those in offices, and in particular, budgetary funding that should be allotted for startup or the continuance of programs that are already in place by the CSOs in the country to assist and help victims, and in terms of support after the fact of coming out, after the fact of getting out, programs that will now empower victims and survivors. There are some programs, and I have been involved in a program where I saw the benefit, but it was a 3-month program funded by the UN. What happens to that program when the UN's responsibility has ended? Where is the fund allotted through government because it's results driven? Where is the funding now to continue that? A CSO is already involved, has already shown how it's working, and it's just put aside. The victim is no longer getting the assistance that they need and has benefited them so far. And this is what we continue to see happening. So where is the support, the government, the real tangible government support for CSOs that are really making a difference in the lives of those who need it?
Understood. Thank you for that, Valdine. And I think it speaks to the whole issue of sustainability and what happens after organizations or government receives international funding. How do we continue and follow up with survivors to ensure that they receive the services that they need? So thank you so much. That point is noted. I'll go to Marlon and then back to Sabrina.
Sure, yeah. If I could just comment on that last point, it's going to be a level of continued advocacy with the government, but also, when a CSO or NGO is involved in this type of work, uh, it's going to be on that organization to really show the social return on the investment, to show the specific results. Of course, ensuring to make sure that person's information is private, but to show the specific results as best as possible, and then continuing to loudly advocate for continuity in that public-private kind of partnership with various arms of the government. So whether it is this Ministry of Social Development and Family Services, whether it's through um, Gender and Child Affairs and Office of the Prime Minister, or whichever state ministry or organization it's true, we should be able to show that social return on investment, and then allow for it to filter back in to the PSIP and SSIP, the public sector and the social sector investment programs, so that the state can see the benefit of what is happening, but also that the wider society is aware, okay, this program happened, this amount of people benefited. These are the tangible results of it. For those who are willing to share their stories, how we can build in that level of marketing to show, okay, this person benefited in this personal way that is applicable to the rest of the society. And that is going to maybe help us to bridge that gap between funding and sustainability.
Yeah, definitely. Continuing to ensure that data is collected at each level of the various interventions and utilizing that data to continue to advocate for the needs of the community. Thank you so much for that, Marlon. Agreed. Go ahead, Sabrina.
And this is something difficult, but necessary as well. The need, I think, for those civil society organization, nonprofits out there to contemplate the pooling of resources, because there are many organizations out there doing the same work. And I remember when there was a booklet produced that documented all of the CSOs, and the last figure I heard that there were like over, in a small country of 1.4 million, whatever, over 500, and that was how much many moons ago. There may be more now. 500 civil society organizations operating in the same space. And then what you found was that with the advent of the Spotlight Initiative, some of those organizations who were not even involved in doing work around family violence and domestic violence found themselves in the space. And so what you find happening is, this competition for very limited resources that's shrinking, and then and it's not going to get any better. So I think civil society organizations and even with government, even the government resources, it's shrinking. So I think we have to strategically have that conversation, that difficult conversation around how we band together, how we collaborate, and how we adopt a multi-sectoral approach towards making the best use of the limited resources that are available.
Thank you so much for that, Sabrina. And that brings us back to the mention of multi-sectorial approaches and collaboration, even at this level, if we are to see any real change. One more point from you, Valdine, before we wrap up.
Yeah, I just want to say I just want to really second and support what Sabrina just said in terms of pooling resources and CSOs and like-minded CSOs, because we do have CSOs for different agendas and different causes. But if you go through, because I know of the booklet that Sabrina is talking about, it was a directory. So it had all of the CSOs listed, their phone. I had a copy. I think it's in somewhere in Orpun, and then I have it. And it was a thick booklet, and it had all of the phone numbers and the email addresses of the country's registered CSOs. And at that time, I was still surviving. I don't call myself a victim. I was still surviving because I'm still here. So at that point in time, in my mind as a reporter was, how come with so many of these people who are like-minded and share the same need to see or lobbying for certain things, how come not much work or more work is being done? And that's because they're so separated and they work in isolation of each other, and they all share the same cause. I think it has to become less of a spirit of competitiveness and more of a spirit, it doesn't matter who gets the bill passed or who gets the cause done or who gets the legislation changed. It more matters to the benefit of the victims and the survivors, and not the pat on the back or even the funding that comes with it. If the funding comes with it, it's all good and well because you can do more with funding. But if we can all band together, if there's 5 like-minded organizations fighting DV in particular, then if those 5 come together, that is 5 additional resources together, that can
Yeah.
get something done. Let's say, for instance, a program started with the UN and couldn't be continued. There are CSOs that could band together and say, based on the results of benefit to the community or to the victims who benefited from it, we can all pull together now and we can see where we could continue this. We could go to the government and say, we have the means to continue this and take it from there. So I second what Sabrina says. We sometimes, as CSOs, we have to understand that we are part of CSO, even though I'm not a registered entity yet, part of a CSO's obligation is for seeing where they can get things done themselves with the help with others,
Yes.
and not just depending on government or outside sourcing.
Agreed. Thank you so much for that, Valdine. And I want to say one of my closing questions was going to be around just one phrase or word that you could say to tell everyone this is how we could continue this conversation. But I feel that the conversation was so rich. There's a lot packed in and shared from each one of you. And I feel like we might have covered how we could continue to have this conversation at the different levels. And one thing that remains very strongly is that multi-sectorial collaborative approach across all entities, especially within the civil society as well as throughout the communities and communities of interest, right? So I want to say to all of you, Marlon, Sabrina, and Valdine, thank you so much for sharing this lunchtime hour with us today. Your words remind us that change begins with each of us, whether through small, safe acts of intervention, fostering cultural change, or creating networks of solidarity and support. As we conclude the 16 days of activism and mark World Human Rights Day, let us take these lessons shared here today and commit to being active participants in the fight against gender-based violence. Let's carry this momentum forward, knowing that our collective action can create safer, more equitable communities for everyone. So thank you so much to our panelists for your expertise and for sharing your time with us today. Thank you to our audience, members of the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services, and the wider Trinidad and Tobago and the world, because I think we're streaming live on YouTube. So who knows who's going to see us today. Together, we can all turn silence into solidarity. Thank you and have a good afternoon, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for having us.
Bye, Valdi, and we'll talk soon. Your mic muted.
How do you leave? How do you leave?
I will